Why are college athletes weak? We're gonna cover this topic and figure out what college athletes can do to improve their overall strength and performance in their collegiate sport, and we're gonna start right now. Okay, so oftentimes we have a ton of athletes that are state champs, all-state football players, all-state soccer players, all-state volleyball players, wrestlers, anybody who is developed inside of our gym, but also in other gyms. Because we've gotten this question from many elite strength coaches that work with high school athletes, and they'll say, hey, we have a kid that went to a college and she ended up playing field hockey and she ends up getting hurt all the time, lower back pain, knee pain, and why? Why is that happening? Why are they being better developed at the high school level? And then they sort of get to college and they're weak. And yes, they do have college classes and they're partying and all these things. But the first big step that we have to think about is who are these schools or what are these schools? And typically some of those schools might be Power 5 schools. Oftentimes they are Power 5 schools. Sometimes these schools might be a mid-major school that doesn't have the best funding, or Division 3 or Division 2 schools that don't have funding at all, and they have to use intern-based strength and conditioning coaches who are very static on what they believe. So often those coaches are training athletes in football, basketball, baseball, and then the functional zealots are typically going to be in sports like golf and in soccer. And so we start to see their problems within their programs. Kids will come in and they might be, a collegiate football player who's going to play D3 football. They're, hey, my school gave me the program. I'm going to do this program on my own for the next 2 to 3 months, and then I'll probably come back and see what's up. And they come back about 3 to 4 weeks later, and they're weaker, they're less motivated, and they're showing me these programs that have a squat, a clean, a bench press, a pull-up, a bent over row, all in the same workout. Okay, so this is a big problem. These programs look like a monkey just threw exercises against the wall and has created this training program. And so we're gonna dive deep into why that happens and what we can do to alleviate that problem. Now, before I have every NCAA strength and conditioning coach jumping down my throat, DMing me, asking me to take this down or to actually talk to me about this and see what's going on, I want to be fair to them, okay? I want to be fair to these collegiate strength and conditioning coaches because they do have time constraints imposed on them by the NCAA, okay? That has to be observed and acknowledged. They do have a brief period of time that they can actually work with these athletes. The next aspect is the fact that they're always going to be working in larger groups. Now, I believe training athletes in larger groups is more beneficial, but it can pose some problems early in that training system. If you have someone like Nick Singleton goes to Penn State and he back squats 500 for 5, or he cleans 335 for a single rep, and then someone else who's also a freshman with him might only back squat 225 for 5 and might only power clean 185 for 1 rep. So there can be a massive disparity between those two levels, and they're training in that same group. So those are two other key aspects. And then finally, I've mentioned this in the intro, where a lot of college kids eat poorly. They're not as focused with their scheduling. They don't have that system, that structure that their family's providing when they're at home in high school, and they're not sleeping well. And again, they're going out drinking and just doing stupid all the time. So we do need to be aware of some of those problems that the collegiate strength and conditioning coaches are facing. Now, those problems don't cause a clean, a back squat, and a bench press, and a bent over row to all be in the exact same program at the exact same time. So that takes us into the prequel to the entire problem. And that major problem is linear periodization. Yes, I said it. Sorry to all of you linear periodization gurus. It's so old school. It's so outdated. Let's move on from this type of periodization, okay? And so if we can just address what linear periodization actually is. This is where the periodization will follow essentially a hypertrophy phase that will lead into that base phase, and then that base phase will lead into that strength power phase. And then from that strength power phase, they'll take that and they'll lead into the peak power or the performance specific period, okay? So it's almost this feeling as though you can only work hypertrophy during this period and you can only work power-based movements during this period. And oftentimes people who follow linear periodization, typically it'll be, 3 sets of 5, 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 12, 3 sets of 10, it's always the exact same loading as well. And so it's pretty simplistic, and it's also well known that we can work hypertrophy in multiple phases. We can work power-based movements in multiple phases and elicit a really good response. And so that's my first problem, is based around linear periodization. And that leads into the real deal problem: not enough volume. Like we mentioned, a lot of these coaches will say, well, during the hypertrophy phase, we can only focus on hypertrophy. We can't do anything that revolves around power development. And so athletes don't have time to learn movements, like technical coordination movements, that will enhance their power development. So that leaves us with too little time on these key movements, with too little time to adapt, and that leads to less strength and less power output. So in a linear periodization model, they might do weightlifting movements or explosive based exercises for 6 to 8 weeks, as opposed to doing it for all 16 weeks of an entire truly thought out, in our system, parabolic periodization. So it's important to see that if we're so focused on hypertrophy, strength, then power, it can inhibit the volume for each class of exercise. And this in turn leads to too many exercises within an actual workout and not enough thought going into transfer of training. And that's where you start to get those workouts that have 3 or 4 major movements in one workout instead of having 1 or 2 major movements in one workout. Okay, so my whole goal was to say, all right, we know that linear periodization is outdated. It's not the best form of periodization. We also do know that the strength and conditioning coaches at the collegiate level have a time frame that they have to work within, and they're dealing with kids that aren't as structured with their lives, and it's a little bit harder, right? But we also know that they also write terrible programs. They write programs that have too many exercises in it with too few sets. So what can we do? How can we alleviate this problem? And that leads to that first key recommendation: is have a 10-minute time frame for warming up and have those exercises laid out. So it's 10 minutes. These are 3 to 4 strict movements that we're gonna be doing during your warm-up. And as soon as that time period is done, now we're moving into that first episode of the actual real workout. And that will take us into that 1A, okay? So 1A should typically be technical coordination exercises. That's gonna be a weightlifting movement. It's gonna be a hang power clean, a hang snatch, a power snatch, a 2-box snatch, a low hang snatch, whatever that might be. There should be a minimum of 6 working sets. And the way that you can get to 6 working sets in a nice time frame is to time the rests, okay? And if you have enough platforms, you can put 2 or 3 people on a platform and you can time those rest periods so that they can get that work done in an efficient manner while still getting enough volume with those technical coordination exercises. And then that takes us into 5 to 6 sets of an absolute strength movement, supersetted with some type of trunk movement or some other accessory that the working group that you're with might have physical leaks. You might have someone, let's say offensive lineman, and their hips are tight. We need to mobilize their hips. So they could do back squats or front squats or single leg squats, and you might pair those movements with some exercise to open up their hips. Or maybe they lack dynamic trunk control, so you do these absolute strength movements for 5 to 6 sets, and they superset each set with a specific trunk exercise to enhance their dynamic trunk control. So now we're using supersets, but we need to use a superset that enhances their performance. It's not just some random thing to make them tired and sweaty so they feel fatigued when they leave and go back to their dorm. We need to think about transfer of training. And we can finish that workout with some type of accessory movements. Maybe it's 3 to 4 sets of a triplet. Okay, so a tri-set, or maybe you just superset your exercises. So it could be, all right, we've got, again, using the example of a field hockey player, lower back issues, some hip problems, or offensive lineman, lower back pain, hip pain. Okay, so let's work on a reverse hyper. And then after the reverse hyper, they can do a sled pull backwards, a sled pull forward, and then we can finish with Nordic hamstring curls. That's just an example thrown out here, but now they can do those 3 movements. Maybe it's 3 sets of 17 reverse hyper. They walk over, pull the sled backward, push the sled forward. Now we're focusing on the anterior sequence, and then we're finishing that off by isolating their hamstrings to try and strengthen their hamstrings so they can run a little bit faster and be more explosive. Now their hamstrings are going to get stronger. They're better at the technical coordination movements, so they learn that technique more effectively. They also learn how to recruit more effectively. And then during the absolute strength phase, they learn how to coordinate their abs effectively with their back squat or their front squat or their single leg squat. And so now that workout that otherwise would have 10 to 12 exercises might have 6 exercises, maybe 7 exercises, depending upon the phase that they're in, but it's more concise. They get stronger, they have more time to practice the technique, and they also focus on a strength training movement that will blow up their technical coordination. And then we finish with some structural integrity work, the reverse hyper, like we mentioned, the Nordic hamstring curls, the sled pushes to help with their knees. And that is a great way to alleviate the time constraints that a lot of these collegiate coaches are in. It also is a great way to get rid of linear periodization and to focus on the movements that transfer the best to sports performance. And finally, this could be done 4 days a week in an hour and 15 minutes. You get that work done. They still have enough time to focus on their actual competitive sport. They're recovering better. And now you can start to work with some undulating periodization, parabolic periodization. If you're a collegiate coach, or maybe you're an intern and you want to learn more about this system, you want to figure out, how can I train my athletes better so that I can be a better coach and get better results? You can click on the link down below, head over to garagestrength.com, and you can pick up the Sports Performance Bible, the book and course. It's a blueprint of what we used to get 5 people to Tokyo this past year at the Olympics. This is how we've developed all of our athletes, and you can learn that directly. If you want to learn from me personally, you can come to the Coaches Summit here at Garage Strength June 4th. Until next time, guys, remember, we've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.